Hi, I'm Helen.
And I'm Ellie.
And we get out of bed in the morning to help organisations all around the world to have really purposeful conversations. We proudly work with AB World Foods, with Drax, with Mars, with Microsoft, with L'Oreal, and the list goes on. We've got a wealth of experience, and what we want to do today is share that experience with you, such that some of the many questions that you have and irritations that you have about meetings are dealt with, and that you leave this webinar with a renewed perspective, some tools that you might be able to apply, and an encouragement, I suppose, to have a renewed energy around making sure that these things that we call meetings are as best that they could possibly be. In fact, we've called this webinar, Stop Going to Meetings and Do Something More Productive Instead. Now, the truth is, we're not really asking you to stop going to meetings. But if you can understand, we're asking you to stop going to meetings in the same way that you've been doing them, because the frustrations and the irritations that you have means that something needs to change and something needs to shift. So my role here today is to share some expertise that both Ellie and I and the rest of the team at TFP have. And Ellie, you're going to be capturing live. Mm-hmm. Ellie's going to be drawing and writing some of the key points, so that when we get to the end of a section, I'll say to you, what are the key points that you've got? Ellie will use her drawing and her capture to call those things out. And at the end of the webinar, if you would like to have a look at this visual and download it, later on we'll tell you how to do that. So hopefully lots of helpful help. The visual that Ellie's creating is set around a tool or a framework that we created many years ago that we call the Meeting Kaleidoscope. You'll see it sitting on the table and also on the chart on the wall there. So the idea of a kaleidoscope, if you think about a kid's kaleidoscope where, if you look down the tube, you'll see different shapes of colours and different colours of glass. If you twist it one way, you might get greens and blues. If you twist it another way, you might get reds and pinks, for instance. But if you twist it just right, the kaleidoscope of colours can be so beautiful and in balance with itself. And in that way, there are elements of a meeting which, if you get the balance right by twisting how you're looking at the meeting, you really can get a balance of purpose and content and people and process that really can mean that the time you spend in a meeting is some of the most valuable time that you can have. So the question here, we're speaking with you through a webinar, through the lens of a camera, and you might be forgiven for thinking that you are part of an audience, but actually you're not. What we want to do is speak with you each as individuals, as best we can make this, to say, well, you might be irritated and frustrated sometimes with meetings. And that irritation and frustration might be at other people's meetings. But the truth is, you might also be falling into the same trap, and people might be leaving your meetings feeling irritated and frustrated. So we speak to you as an individual, and this webinar is a meeting of minds, ours and yours, and the question is, how good could we make this?
So Helen,
Yeah.
We do a lot of work with organisations around their culture and how they're working together and how the culture can really enable their strategy.
Yeah.
We also are facilitators, and a lot of our work is through meetings. So how does a meeting impact a company culture? Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about an organisation that has a clear vision and a clear purpose and a really good strategy, in order to bring that strategy to life every single day, the culture of the organisation has got to be enabling, and it's got to be freeing, and it's got to bring the best of people. Now, if you think about it, and we did some training this morning, can you remember the person that said, really the only time that we get together in our organisation is when we're in meetings. And Edgar Schein really smartly observed that if you want to really understand how the culture of an organisation is, all you've got to do is look in through the window at one of their meetings. You know, who turns up, where people sit, who speaks, who doesn't speak, whether the meeting achieves something, whether actions follow through. And so a meeting is almost like the unit currency of the organisation doing its work, doing its job, making the best of the brains across the organisation. But very often, meetings can feel like straitjackets, or they can feel like, you know, despite all the meetings we have, we still get the work done. So culturally, meetings can be the unlocker to culture, and the unlocker to people feeling that they can really contribute to the way the organisation's moving forward. In preparation for this webinar, I was sort of thinking, I wonder why we've got to the stage that we're in terms of people really feeling the frustrations and irritations that they have. And now this isn't scientifically backed. I can't back this up with data. It is a point of view, right? But I think that there are probably 3 or 4 reasons why we are where we are. And I'm going to say we are where we are across the world because we work globally. If you think the word meeting probably is one of the most used words across the entire planet. Clearly, it's in the various languages and so on. But one of the things we share as human beings in business is that we meet.
Yeah.
And yet the word meeting in most countries that we work in most situations that we work in, almost has a negative connotation. And so I believe that our mindset, our belief about the word meeting almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, if you look into any statistics about meetings, you can look at it, you know, there is a wealth of stats that really shine a really bad light on meetings. It's very rare that you'll find advocates of meetings. Often you'll find that 71% of people in the US or wherever, or France or wherever, believe that meetings are a waste of time. You've got to look with a very big magnifying glass to find information to the contrary. And so I think our belief around the word and the way we speak about meetings is becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's almost like we're joining the ranks of people saying, yeah, meetings get bad press.
Yeah. And the word meeting is a word. It's not the meeting's fault it's bad.
No. A meeting isn't a meeting without the people in it.
No.
So meetings get bad press, but what are the people who are in the meetings, doing about it? And this is why I think we're on a bit of a crusade.
Yeah, we are.
So there's mindset around that word. I think the next thing is, when you think about it, Ellie, you go to school, you go to college, you go to university, and you will learn your reading, your writing, your maths, arithmetic. You might then start to specialise into biology or chemistry or art or whatever you specialise in at college. And then you might go to university, and then you're expanding your mind about education that's going to get you your degree and so on. And so we leave university, or we leave our formal education with a wealth of skills and information and knowledge in certain subject areas, but I can't think of of many curriculum that is going to be helpful to us to make the bridge into work. I can't think of any curriculum. Now, I might be wrong. This is a point of view, remember. So there might be curricula out there that have got how to meet well. But I don't think education really teaches us, didn't teach me, or students to know what to do. And so what happens is we leave that formal education, we make the bridge into the formal work environment, and the first time that we experience a meeting is when we walk through a meeting door, and it's just a whole alien world. And then we're at the hands or at the mercy of the people in that meeting, our elders, our bosses, our supervisors, our superiors in a way, or people who've been in the organisation longer. We sort of take our cue from them. Now, we might be lucky. There might be somebody in the organisation who's leading meetings really well, who really gets how good can be. But I think mostly people are in bad habits. And so when you're new in an organisation, all you've got around you are those sort of mediocre meetings and bad habits, and all you do then is follow suit. And it's like a passing the baton of mediocre meetings or poor meetings through the organisation. So our elders don't help, but then probably nobody helped them. Yes, there are training courses that people go on, but often when you go on to a training course about how to have a good meeting, you might leave that training course with some good ideas, but there is often a gap between what you know at the end of a training course and what you then do. So the gap between knowing and doing is vast. So it's tough. The other thing that I was reflecting on was I think that typically in the Western world, and I don't know how what this is like all around the world, but typically we are seen to be doing well when we are in a discussion where we can be really articulate, where we can get our point across really clearly, when we can be persuasive, when we can sort of win an argument or win a conversation. And so what happens sometimes is that meetings become arenas for performance. When you think back to, again, our education, debating societies in school, you are praised on your ability to debate a point. And your skill in debates is to minimise somebody else's point of view and to get your point of view across. Now, when you think about how organisations work well and work best, it's not about people beating each other with my position or my point is better than your point. It's about what do you know and what do you know and how can we collectively use what we all know to help make something really good happen. You know, we are part of one interconnected system in an organisation, and it's our combined knowledge, our combined curiosity, our combined will to take the business forward that really wins out. But that's not how we're raised in many ways. So there's another quote that I'd like to give just to conclude this sort of bit of a rant, I suppose, that I'm on, which is, I said a few moments ago that the only behaviour that you can change is your own. And there's a gentleman who was a politician in the US called John Andrew Holmes. And this makes me smile every time I read this. I love this quote, which is, "It is well to remember that the entire universe, with one trifling exception, is made up of others." So you are the trifling exception, and I am the trifling exception, and so are people watching this webinar. But we, as individuals, as trifling exceptions, are the only people that can actually make a change and make a difference. So it's time to do that. And what I want to do next is explore in detail how we do that by really looking at the kaleidoscope with its elements and explain each section and how it might be used.
So Helen, we hear a lot of people's common irritations in meetings. So things like, well, I have too many meetings, there's no clear purpose, there's no clear outcomes, or I've got so many meetings, I don't even know if I should be attending these meetings. And these are some really big statements. And when we think about people globally having these same irritations, it's a lot. So when I think about starting with the kaleidoscope, I think this would be a good place to start.
Okay, good, thank you. So right at the very heart of the kaleidoscope is purpose. And you and I both know that Simon Sinek made begin with why, a popular question and a very significant and important question to ask. But way before that, the work of high quality meetings has always started with begin with why. So I was struck the other day, we were leading a training session, weren't we? And the training session comprised 3 people that were attending as trainees. And one poor guy had literally arrived from one meeting and hadn't had lunch and said, do you mind if I just eat my sandwich while we're doing this? And just remind me again why I'm here. And he dutifully, gone from one session to another, was squeezing in his lunch, couldn't quite remember why he was here, and thankfully he could ask us. But you sort of think, gosh, that is a tough place for somebody to be. And I think we both know that he isn't on his own, because people fall into meetings all the time. You'll have a meeting, and then as a result of that meeting, you'll find yourself booked into 3 other meetings just to follow up in conversations, or you might bump into somebody in the office, and before you know it, you're engaged in a really good conversation and you say, okay, let's have a meeting about this. And so before people know it, there are tributaries of meetings that, like tentacles, that just sort of, reach into people's calendars. And so there's no wonder why people end up in back-to-back meetings and not clarity of purpose. And so we need to sort of backtrack on all of that and say, hang on a minute, stop. To give of your time and to give of your energy has got to be purposeful. And to accept an invite for a meeting, really, you need to know why that meeting's happening and why you're needed. You and I both know, and our team at TFP talk about our definition of a meeting is when 2 or more people come together with a clear purpose to have meaningful discussion, to share thoughts, to create solutions, to decide on outcomes. But without that clarity of purpose right at the very beginning, that meeting may have ended up just in a nice chat. And so one of the tools that we created, as you know, is a tool that really anchors itself around purpose, clarity of purpose, and we call this tool PREP. And the first P in PREP is have a clear purpose. So why this meeting? Why now? Why this group of people? And that clarity of purpose should be connected to the team's goals, the organisation's goals, the higher purpose. In other words, if we didn't have this meeting, what would be lost? And then the R in PrEP stands for roles and resources. So who do we need and what do we need for this meeting to take place? The E, crucially, means expected outcome. So if there is a clear purpose of the meeting, that's a good thing. But as a result of that meeting happening, what outcome was achieved? Was it a decision? Was it a plan? Was it a solution? And without expected outcomes, it's very difficult for a group to converge and bring that meeting to a meaningful close. The final P is plan. Many people like to call it an agenda. Once again, we have a thought, don't we, that the word agenda has a bit of a connotation to it that feels like a stifling straitjacket sometimes. So we refer to it as a plan. Yes, it's a play on words, but a plan is how are we going to help this group move through a conversation so that their role is clear, so that their contribution is valued, and so that those expected outcomes are achieved. And we often say, if you do nothing else to change your behaviour around meetings, if you could only do one thing, that one thing would be to have a PrEP, purpose, roles, expected outcomes and plan for every single meeting. Somebody gave us a really fantastic quote in preparation for this webinar, and I'd just like to read this out. That person said, and I'm reading, "It would be really great somehow to have a clear, big picture summary of the meeting's purpose displayed somewhere, making it easier for all participants to understand the context, why they're there, and to have it displayed visually, which must be like music to your ears as a visualizer. For visual people would be such a bonus." She said it would be like a godsend. And so we always advocate, don't we, that the meeting purpose is either physically in the meeting room, or if you're working online, to have it in a space such as Miro or Mural or whatever online space that you're using. And so purpose is the cornerstone of every meeting, and it is in the very heart of our kaleidoscope, because that's where all things converge.
So Helen, the takeaway really from what you've just shared is all around PrEP.
Yes.
So PrEP being the hero. It's like if we do our PrEP, if we do our PrEP before the meeting, we'll be able to share with participants before why this meeting, why now, what we need from them, and the plan for our time together.
Yes. And we know, don't we, that when people send a calendar invite, they'll often put the PrEP into the calendar invite. So when we get people telling us that their common irritation is, I don't know the purpose of the meeting, I don't know what we're supposed to be doing, if PrEP is in the calendar invite, bingo. And we also know that people say to us, I'm in so many meetings, I just haven't got time to do the PrEP for the meeting. And what do we say to that? That's fine. At the beginning of the meeting, take 5 minutes with the people that you're with and do PrEP with them. So people don't have to have the weight of preparation of a meeting all on their shoulders. We are in this together. You know, when we get to a meeting, sometimes we haven't had chance to do all the final preparation that we want, but we're not on our own.
And I love what you say. I love what you say around, you know, if you've got a regular meeting, do the PrEP at the end of the meeting for the next session, so that people all feel like they've participated and they've got their skin in the game, ready to make the next meeting a success.
Yes, absolutely. And so when you talk about people, let's move on to the next part of the kaleidoscope then. And it's hard to know which order to do the kaleidoscope in, because they're all as important. But we're speaking about people, so let's go there next. Yeah.
So when it comes to people, I think what's top of mind for me is the labels.
Yeah.
So we know that people might say, I'm in marketing, I'm in HR, I'm a CEO, and they automatically get these labels put on themselves, but by others. And I think it can be limiting to what's actually possible when you get the brains in the room together to do some stuff.
Yes, I agree. So people and how we label each other. I remember, this might not be funny to anybody but me.
Okay, go on, give it a go then.
Years ago, when I was learning to be a facilitator, we learned a lot about not to apply labels to people. And the example that we shared with us is in our daily life. Let's imagine we go to a restaurant and you order the beef and I order the fish, and the waiter or waitress, serving person has taken that order down. When the food comes back, that person will say, who's the beef? And you'll say, I'm the beef. And they'll say, who's the fish? And I'll say, I'm the fish. And we sort of assume our order. It's a bit like, I remember going to visit somebody, a friend in hospital who'd had their appendix out.
Oh, gosh.
And the consultant arrived and said to my friend, oh, so you're the appendix? And the person said, yes. And so this idea of labelling is humorous, maybe. I think it's funny. Other people might not. But we sort of assume the role.
Yeah.
And that's what happens inside of organisations as well. So I know that when people invite others to their meetings, they'll be thinking, I'll invite Ellie. She's an extrovert. She'll do plenty of talking, but I hope she doesn't talk too much. And I'll invite Joe. You know, he's a bit more of an introvert. I need to be able to get him to speak a bit more. And then there's Dave. Oh, my goodness. Is he going to derail? You know, he's going to be saying some stuff that's going to derail this. And so what happens is you start to apply your belief about people's behaviour to them. And you end up listening to people saying, well, you've got extroverts and you've got introverts, and the introverts don't speak and the extroverts speak too much. That's not right.
No.
That's not right. And so what we would like to say here is that don't apply labels. People are just people. And the best thing that we can do for people in meetings is to expect that if we get a couple of things right, they'll be able to give of their best. And the couple of things to do right are be clear about the purpose. So there's going to be some really reoccurring themes here. Be clear about why the meeting. Be clear about the expected outcomes. But be clear about why you need Ellie, Joe, or Dave in your meeting. And if you can, let them know. So, Ellie, I want you to come to this meeting because you've got some expertise, etc., etc., etc.
So how might you let them know? If you said, would you send it in the calendar invite? Would you give them a call?
Yeah, either of those things.
Yeah, okay.
Just let them know why they're needed. And, you know, when I think about the common irritations, so we had some questions, didn't we, about people arrive late or leave early. People don't do pre-reads, or they're not fully prepared. Or people feel that a meeting isn't relevant to them. Should they attend, and what's their role? Well, all of these things can be taken care of if people know why they're needed.
Yeah. And we talk a lot about inviting people who aren't the usual suspects. So when you think you've got a meeting coming up, you think, right, I need Ellie, I need Joe, I need Dave.
Yeah.
But actually, you've got perspectives there, and being able to bring in, you don't want people that are just going to tell you what you want to hear. You need to bring in those different perspectives to really help stretch the thinking as well, don't you?
Absolutely. So we talk a lot, don't we, about how we can manage the attention in a meeting, how we can keep people focused. And you do that by having real clarity of purpose, real clarity of expected outcomes. And then we talk a lot about people's energy in a meeting. And energy in a meeting isn't about high energy and low energy. It's about connected energy. It's about how you can create the conditions for people to want to engage with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you know why you're in a meeting and I know why I'm there and Ben knows why he's there and Phoebe, we're more likely to want to engage because we know that our contribution is needed and welcome. There's something I forgot to mention when we were talking about purpose.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good place to bring it in here. If you imagine, or if you can draw for the notes there, a pyramid or a triangle.
Yeah.
If you imagine that being 4 layers in the pyramid, with the very top of the pyramid being the ultimate goals of the organisation,
Mm-hmm.
and the very bottom of the pyramid being the meetings that we attend.
Yeah.
The next layer up should be people,
Mm-hmm.
and the next layer up should be strategy. This is back to culture, really.
Yeah.
So meetings done well can enable people to do their work well, which can enable strategy, which moves the organisation towards their goal, their vision, etc. And so what that means is you ought to be able to draw a line directly from the meetings that you're having
Mm-hmm.
all the way through to the ultimate goal of the business. And if you can make that connection between the meeting that you're having now and where the business needs to go, and people can see how their contribution enables that, then it stands to reason in my brain somehow that they will want to attend. They will want to add that value, rather than having a meeting where I'm not sure why I'm needed.
Mm-hmm.
Will anybody really notice if I don't turn up, etc., 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 etc.
Because they can see how their work is directly
Yeah.
impacting the
Yeah.
business moving forward.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely right.
Helen, we talk about labels,
Yeah.
and we talk about even where people sit in a meeting room,
yeah,
and how
gosh.
you can just step into the seat. Will you say something about that?
Oh, yes. A chair can do funny things to people. There's an anecdote about an executive coach, and he watches as the people drive up his driveway. He's a very successful executive coach. He has a driveway. And he looks out of the window and he sees people arriving in their car, and they might leap out of their car and be full of the joys. And then they walk into his office and sit into the chair where they were the last time he was being coached, he was coaching them. And what happens is the minute that they sit down, they get anchored into the feelings that they were feeling the last time they were in their coaching session. It sort of brings them back to where they were. And that sets the tone for how the coaching session starts. And I observe this in meetings. So people will walk through a meeting room door, and then suddenly, because of how they might be feeling about a meeting, it suddenly brings them back to a meeting that went well last time, or a meeting that didn't go so well last time. And then when they sit in the same seat that they usually sit in, it anchors them back into how they were feeling last time in the meeting. I have a horrendous memory of being reasonably junior in an organisation, and I'd been asked to go in to see the operating board to give them a perspective on a project that I was hoping to get their backing on. And I was nervous, and it was quite an intimidating thing, and I mixed up my words. And the word that I wanted to use was momentum. I wanted this project and trying to sell the momentum that this project would bring. And I ridiculously switched the word and used the word inertia, which means to pin back and to not move forward. And what they did was they just rolled about. I mean, it's funny, really, when you think about it. It was ridiculous. But they didn't help me out. I'd obviously made a rookie mistake, a big mistake, actually. But all they could do was laugh, and there were tears running down their faces, which was hilarious to them, but it just made me feel smaller and smaller and smaller, and I just wanted to get out of there. That same meeting room, each time I went back in there and just was in that room or in that seat, would anchor me back to that humility, or that feeling humiliated, sorry. And so I think it's the same for people. You sort of become the chair that you sit in a way. And so we always encourage people to sit in different seats, don't we?
We do. And so that's talking about when you're in face-to-face meetings.
Yeah.
So what about when you're working from home and, you know, you're kind of limited in terms of where you can sit? How would you get around? Maybe you've had a bad experience of the last meeting and you need to kind of shake it up, ready to reset your mind and your focus, ready for your next one.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Well, the best advice I can give there is change your body.
Okay.
So changing your body is the best way to stimulate the brain to have a different thought pattern. So changing your body might be changing your seat in your home environment, or even standing up at a kitchen counter, or standing up at a tabletop, but changing your orientation. So let's imagine that the chair, you can't change the chair that you're in, but you can change the angle so you've got a different viewpoint. Okay. So change your body to change how you're thinking is what I'd say.
Nice.
But you're absolutely right. A chair can do very funny things to people, and it's worth remembering. So from there, really, what I'd love to do is talk about content. So the subject matter of a meeting is the stuff, technical term, that's being discussed. So it's the data being shared, the customer feedback that's being shared, the employee survey information being shared. It's all of the data, the numbers, the performance results and so on. That's content. But also content is people's opinions, people's point of view, people's questions. That's all the substance of the meeting. And we call it, on the TFP Kaleidoscope, we call it content. But actually, really, it's the knowledge that's being shared. Now, weirdly, when people put an agenda together for a meeting, it will typically look like a list of bullet points. So bullet point number 1, bullet point number 2, a list of topics. And there might be some timings against that bulleted list. But the topics really are the headlines for the content or the knowledge that is about to be shared. And we know that there is a repeating pattern in organisations for content or knowledge to be shared in the same way each time, which is typically a PowerPoint slide. Now, not always. To be fair, it's not always the case. And less these days it might be the case. But PowerPoint is brilliant and it has its place, but not when it is used as the only method for sharing content. And so what I want to do for this part is to really talk to you and share some thinking about how data, how opinions, how insight, how curiosity and creativity can actually be shared. When we think about information being shared in a meeting, we know that too much information can clog the system up and slow everything down.
Yeah.
Too little information and there isn't enough substance to get any traction or to get any headway. So the question is, for people listening to this podcast, to this webinar, is how can you make sure that the right level of information and the right sharing of knowledge is happening in a way that is way more engaging to the brains in the room than simply showing a slide and then having a bit of a chat about it.
And listening to you, it's making me think about one of the conversations we had in the training that we're running this morning around when people come to a meeting, they often get called an audience.
Oh, yeah.
And people will then treat the people in the room like an audience. So by talking at them, talk.
Yeah.
Whereas our preference is to use the word participants because they are participating in the conversation. It gives you that different mindset about how you're going to share the content that you've got to share.
Yes, agreed. So you're right. You know, we hear an awful lot that people say we get people together to give them updates.
Yeah.
And their intention is good.
Yeah.
Because at least we're bringing people together. We want people to be together while we're giving them the updates. But why would you do that when you've got...
The brain power that you've got in the room is just like crazy. So why would you just...
Why treat people like an audience when 1 + 1 + 1 + 1, people, person plus person plus person, could equal so much more?
Yeah.
If you think about, I would say in the olden days, I don't know whether it's as prevalent today in meetings as it used to be back when I was a girl.
When was the olden days?
A long time ago. But knowledge back then was power.
Yeah.
And people would hold on to their knowledge and sort of protect their knowledge and stand by their PowerPoint slide to demonstrate how knowledgeable they were, and do their best to explain things to the people who clearly weren't knowledgeable, but they would walk out of the meeting room still holding all of their knowledge. Nowadays, what we see in organisations is that knowledge, it's like putting, I was going to just say, it's like putting a pound into the bank. Hopefully it gathers interest, but I'm not so sure these days. But the idea that if you seed a bit of information, if you seed a bit of knowledge, and your intention is to raise the level of knowledge across the group, how good could the potential be for people to engage in that in a way that's meaningful? So let's imagine you have a finance person. And the finance person knows that, you know, dealing with numbers is a particular skill set that not everybody has. If they want leaders of teams to be able to do their work well, the finance people would do well to encourage an understanding at a certain level of that knowledge. Or people with a skill of technology, for example, is to help really share that information so that the whole pot of knowledge grows.
Yeah.
Now, you imagine, you talked to me about this earlier, the kid in the crowd. Do you want to talk about that for a sec? So the person who doesn't have knowledge.
Yeah. So quite often you might find that people would hold back or not be sure of somebody's talking about a topic, and it happened to me the other day. I didn't understand what was being talked about. I thought, right, well, I'm going to have to ask because it's not making sense to me, and surely I can't be the only person that has this question. So I waited for my time to speak and said, got a question here, and I'm going to be the kid in the crowd that shouts out, the emperor's not wearing any clothes, because it's this thing. And I called it out, and people just kind of saw relief on people's faces in the fact that they needed a bit of clarity around something, or they needed a bit of detail, because actually it wasn't just me who didn't know what the person who was talking had assumed everybody knew.
Yeah. Yes, it's lovely. And then when you add in acronyms.
Oh, God.
Oh my goodness. How many acronyms do we come across in organisations?
Well, we've got the check-in that we often do. We haven't talked about check-ins yet, but when the acronym game of playing a game, because there are so many acronyms within lots of organisations.
Yes. And so if I, and this is one that I use quite often, which you know, if I said to you this simple sentence, the dog ran across the road. So if you get a picture now of the dog running across the road.
You can imagine the dog that I have in my mind.
So what colour dog do you have in your mind?
He's called Rolo, and he's a Cocker Spaniel, and he looks like a Rolo.
And is the road busy or quiet?
Busy.
Are there parked cars?
No.
Is there any danger to Rolo?
Yeah, lots.
Right, okay. Now, if we had a room full of people here and I said the dog ran across the road, the chances are that somebody in their mind might imagine a white dog and it's a country lane and there are some parked cars but not many. And so what happens is in every individual brain, the words that are shared create an understanding for them.
Yeah.
Which is hard enough when you're using sort of simple language.
Yeah.
If you then add in acronyms that people just don't know what the acronym means, they've got to fight for their life to figure out what did that acronym mean, and then there's their interpretation on the acronym and so on. And before you know it, you might have 10 people in a room all on a very different map of what they think is happening in the room, which is why, not the only reason why, but why quite often there is misunderstanding in a group.
And I think this is actually, I'm like desperate to say that this really highlights the need to work visually. So we know that people will be working in meetings with all this content. You hear different perspectives, different views, and quite often all this stuff evaporates. And you can't actually see what other people mean because it's spoken, maybe assumed that people understand, and to actually capture it down and have it physically, like we're going to have the visual from this conversation, that will really help people to understand each other. So across acronyms, across departments within organisations, and across languages, across the globe, you know, the ability to work visually, just write something down on a sticky note or write something down on a flip chart, can really help with that shared understanding and for everybody to be on the same page.
Yeah. So brilliant. So let's together now just do a quick brainstorm of all the different ways that people can share content or share knowledge in a meeting.
Yeah.
And I'll go first
Okay,
just
go.
because
You
I
go,
will.
you go.
So I'm going to say PowerPoint is legitimate as a way of sharing information if it's used in the right way at the right time.
Yeah.
So
you could use Miro or Mural, which are online collaborative spaces where you can capture information really easily.
yeah, brilliant. You can use templates for people to have their conversation around a template is another way to share information.
You could use a spreadsheet with all the data.
Yeah. You could use posters for people to see. You could use infographics.
Yeah, infographics.
Yeah.
You could use video.
Yeah.
You could use case studies.
Yeah.
Interviews.
Scenario planning where you're mapping out a scenario. So many different and creative ways to share and discuss content. And so just falling back into show a PowerPoint and have a conversation is probably the least that you could do.
You often talk about it in terms of it's like playing a keyboard.
Yes.
And being able to play jazz with what you're sharing.
Yes.
And not just doing PowerPoint, because that would be, at first it might sound all right.
Yes.
But then after a while it becomes very repetitive and people could just start to switch off because it's just the same old thing over and over again.
And that would be the equivalent of just sitting at a keyboard and playing middle C,
Yeah.
bong, 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 when actually what you could do is play a little bit of jazz and get people working in different ways. So there's one quote, there's one really great book, and I know you know that I love this book, and it goes back years, but it's called The Knowledge Creating Company.
And who's that by?
Two Japanese gentlemen, Nonaka and Takeuchi.
Yeah.
And there's a quote here I've got written down here from Nonaka, which is true, actually, about people when they're engaging in discussion that they feel passionately about and they're sharing content and sharing knowledge. In the act of creating, people can argue. Now,
Right.
you might say, well, that's fine. We want people to agree or disagree. So they'll have a heated dialogue, which I think is also really good, because if conversations always stay polite, that might be nice, but how real are they really? They might have a heated dialogue and they might get upset. But without that real exchange, you can't create knowledge. And knowledge creation is a human activity. So AI is coming in. Don't get me started on AI. But in the end, humans with their knowledge is one thing. But humans with passion and belief is a whole other thing. And if you can really get knowledge sharing and creation happening in meetings such that people are passionate, then you've got some creativity going, and then you've got engagement potentially. So it's a great book, and I would commend it to everyone. So the summary of knowledge share before we move on to the next section is, again, and no apologies for repeating this, create the platform for good knowledge sharing or content sharing by having a clear purpose for your meeting, some good outcomes, and the right people in the room. Vary the range of tools and ways that you're sharing knowledge. Where you can, get knowledge shared before the meeting so that people can come into the meeting warm. And have clarity at the end of the meeting as to how that knowledge is going to be used as in an action. And who else might need to be informed.
And for me, the takeaway from this is around bringing people together to be participating with the content rather than just bringing them together to just be an audience and just to listen.
Yes. Share the knowledge, share the content, and do something with it.
Love it.
Amazing. So the last part of the kaleidoscope that we haven't touched on yet is process.
Okay, process queen.
Process queen. Now, as a facilitator, process is the world that I live in, and it's also the world that you live in. And it would be our wish, wouldn't it, that more people got excited about meeting processes and meeting tools. Because even if you've got clear purpose, even if you've got clear expected outcomes, even if you've got the right people in the room, if you don't use a really good process to get the conversation going, you've missed an opportunity. So a good process is like the golden key that unlocks the potential of that meeting.
So before we dive into process, I'm going to be the kid in the crowd, thinking about people watching our conversation. When you say process, what exactly is it?
So we need to achieve this outcome, which means that we need a way of exploring data, sharing insights, asking questions, finding solutions. And what I know is the default thing is that people get around a meeting table, whether that's a face-to-face meeting table or an online one, and just talk. Now, just talking is fine. It's what we humans do well. But to have every part of a meeting just a conversation runs the risk of having the usual voices being heard and the usual people being quiet. It runs the risk of being narrow because you're not looking to the left and to the right for alternative thinking. You're literally sharing and trading points of view. So the process is the thing that you would suggest to the group about how we might have that conversation.
Okay.
It's the methodology that moves the conversation along.
Okay.
And the trick is to mix the process up. So, for instance, you could view it that there are five ways that you could engage a group.
Yeah. I know where you're going with this.
You know where I'm going with this one. It looks like a staircase. And the first stair, this is the work of Peter Senge. You can find this model in the 5th Discipline Field Book for those people that are interested.
And that is one of our go-to books.
That is
one
of our...
You take it everywhere with you.
I take it all around the world with me. Yeah, I wouldn't leave home without it. Unless I'm on a date or something. And
okay.
that would be weird.
A bit weird.
So the very first step is tell. So you can decide that you want to tell a group something, and you use a process such as a PowerPoint slide and a question and answer session, and that is legitimate process. The next step up is sell. So you could sell an idea to a group, which means you're telling them something and then adding in what's in it for us.
Yeah.
The next way to engage a group is to test. So let's imagine Ben, our business partner, comes into one of our meetings and he goes, right, Helen, Ellie, I've got an idea. I think it's really good, but I haven't really fully thought it through.
Yeah.
What I want to do is test my thinking with you. I want you to help me explore what I've got, what I've missed, what's good about it, what might not be so good about it. So to engage a group in a way of testing thinking is very good. The fourth element is consult. So you can use a slot in a meeting to consult with the people in front of you. So let's imagine you know that you have a problem to solve, but before you do the work, you want to use the brains in the room to say, what are the elements that I need to consider? So you're going to consult with them before you then take their input and use that to do the thinking.
Yeah.
The final part on this staircase is to co-create. So we could, in one of our meetings, make sure that we've got enough time to say to the group, listen, we've had this customer feedback. We have to get a solution. Our quarter's results depend on us being able to pivot and do something different. Now, what are we going to do? And so what you do is you co-create the solution to the problem in the meeting. And what happens often is people talk about there's a problem and talk about we need to go and do something, spend the meeting talking about what we need to do, but not actually doing it. And so you can use the meeting and put a process in there to co-create the solution.
So would you say in that case then the meeting is the place where the work gets done?
The meeting, therefore, is the place where the work gets done. And, rather than people having to do the work in their evenings and whatnot, do the work while you're all together.
So could that still be the case if you were to do a tell or a sell, or would the work being done only be left for a co-create type of session?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. So quite often, a tell can be such a relieving thing for a group. So let's imagine you have a group who have experienced a lot of change, or they've got a lot of heavy work, they've got a lot of heavy deadlines. For them, maybe the last thing they want to do is start getting into a meeting and starting to co-create something.
Yeah, because they're just wanting some leadership.
They just want some leadership, they want some direction, and therefore the person leading that tell can make sure that there's clarity.
Yeah.
So they might do the tell and then say, is that clear? What questions do you have? So they can still check that people understand, but it still can feel for the group that they have solved something because they now have some clear direction from the boss or the owner of a particular project.
Yeah.
So this model we call the Tell, Sell, Test model, originating from Peter Senge and colleagues. And it's a great tool, but the watch-outs for it are, or just the things to bear in mind, is co-creating in a meeting can take longer to do than telling. So telling's quite quick.
Yeah.
And then all of the range in between. And equally, the axis up the side, I know you're drawing these axes here,
Yes,
Ellie,
I am.
is that if you tell a group something and give them clarity, that's good, but you might only get them to comply. Whereas if you co-create with a group, you're more likely for that group to feel full-blooded commitment to the solution because they've got their fingerprints
Yeah.
on the work. Now, that's not to say that telling is not as good as co-creation.
Mm-hmm.
That is to say that if you're really smart in your meetings, you will balance up elements to tell,
Yeah.
elements to test, elements to consult, elements to co-create.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing that, you're less likely for your meetings to become blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
You're more likely to engage people. You know, I love coming to Ellie's meeting because there's something going to be different every single time.
Mm-hmm.
And then the only other thing to say is when you're working to find a good process for your meeting, when I was first starting out, we had to create our own processes.
Yeah.
But nowadays, oh my goodness,
So many.
so many. I mean, where would you advise people to go look for templates and so on?
So I'd Google it. So you can look online and Google processes for visioning or processes for decision making. But with the growth of these online platforms like Miro, Mural, they are becoming search engines in themselves in a way for processes for meetings. So if you go into the Miroverse, for example, we love that one because you've got processes from big consultancies, you've got processes from smaller businesses, all of which are creative. They tend to be collaborative because they're in these online spaces.
Mm-hmm.
But the beauty of them is that they can be used in the online space.
Yeah.
But anything that you find, you can draw it on a flip chart on the wall. You know, it tends to be a series of boxes, columns, circles. They're very easy, so we don't want to let the fact that something is digital distract from actually, you can just use this in the room as well.
Yeah. And we've watched the groups that we've trained already get really playful
Yeah.
with the processes that they're bringing into meetings.
Mm-hmm.
They've gone into
Yeah.
places to borrow templates, but they've started also to create their own.
Yeah.
And that creativity is a joy
Yeah.
to watch when people start to play a bit
Yeah.
of their own jazz,
Yeah.
isn't it? So, snappy summary.
Yeah.
The
Well, before we do summary, I just
Yeah.
wonder, so we've said about what processes and we've said that there are different types of processes, but
Yeah.
can we give an idea about once you've got into a conversation,
Yeah.
you've set up the conversation to be successful,
yeah.
what processes might we see as kind of I'm going to say standard types?
Yeah. So you might, at the beginning of a meeting, you might have a check-in, so where people have joined the meeting either in person or online. And the purpose of a check-in is to bridge people from where they were 5 minutes ago into the work to be done
Yeah.
now.
Mm-hmm.
So getting people ready to do the work. Other processes might be exploratory type processes, such as a SWOT analysis or a context map or a history map where we've come from, or 5 forces map, or the
Would you say a worked well and I wish would sit in there?
something as simple as 2 columns.
Yeah.
What's worked well? What do I wish? So processes don't need to be tricky.
Mm-hmm.
So there are processes that diverge the conversation, where you're really getting into some richness and some breadth of sharing knowledge, sharing information, creating. And then there are processes where you would start to converge, where you're going to start to bring the conversation to a close.
Mm-hmm.
So there are decision-making tools,
Okay.
such as voting, for instance, or working out the spheres of control and influence might help decision-making.
Mm-hmm.
decision making such as decision trees
Yeah.
or paths of decision making, energy in, value out, cost versus benefit would be that type of process that would help to bring in. And then the very final process at the end of a conversation would be the plan.
Yeah.
So what action step are we going to take? Specifically, who will take that step?
Yeah.
By when? And it might even, if you've got time, talk about how they might take that step.
Nice.
Yeah. And I'm just minded to say as we close this session on process, the common irritations that will be addressed by working really well with process are no clear agenda.
Yeah.
Well, the agenda is the series of processes. No clear follow-up. Well, if you've decided well and you've got your action step, it will prevent the majority of meetings going round in circles. If you've got a really good process, you're not just talking shop and people looping on themselves. You've really got good process to keep the conversation moving forward. Another irritation is lack of decision making. Well, if you've really got people involved and then you've started to use a process to decide, that can really help.
Yeah.
Not getting through the agenda. Here's a top tip.
Oh, yes, we like this one.
If you find that you're not getting through your agenda, the best possible thing that you can do is reduce the number of items on your agenda. We often say by half. And then do each one really well.
Yeah.
Top
Give
tip.
it time, yeah.
Lack of ownership and actions for overall progress. Again, if you've engaged people in a good process and decision making, the chances are that people will be really keen to follow up.
Yeah.
Because they've really seen a conversation from start to finish. So they're the irritations that would be helped.
Brilliant.
Okay, so that work is really inspired by Peter Senge. Another place for people to look would be Sam Kana.
Yeah.
And we can put these links into the chart.
Yeah.
So here we are. We're at the end probably of this webinar, and we know that we could talk forever about this. To pull this all together, what would be really good, I know you've been capturing the headlines that people will be able to see.
Yeah.
From what you've heard, what do you think are the key takeaways from this session that people might be able to use immediately that this webinar is finished?
Yeah. So we have covered a lot.
Yeah.
So keeping it high level. So a couple of big things here. Firstly being is the kaleidoscope.
Yeah.
So when we're thinking about our meetings, we think about the purpose of the meeting. We think about the people of the meeting, think about the content and the process. Yeah. Everything sits around that. And if you're making the shifts, like in the Kids Kaleidoscope, make those shifts to really bring it into crystal clear focus.
Yeah.
The other huge thing is prep. Prep is like the queen of successful meetings. So if we've got a clear purpose, clear expected outcomes, clear roles, and a clear plan, we're setting ourselves up for success.
Yes.
The reason being is everybody knows why they're there, what's needed from them, how you're going to work together, and it's really going to be beneficial. You know, we can put a bit in the calendar invites, we can share it at the beginning of the meeting, share it in the meeting, share it at the end of the meeting. It keeps that visual reference for everybody to be on the same page.
Yeah.
Another thing I think is really important, which plays into the common irritations, is around people knowing why they're invited to a meeting. So giving people the heads up beforehand, hi, I'm having this meeting, I really need you there, because people can come into the meeting knowing what's needed from them, and it's going to mean that if people don't know why they're going to a meeting, do they even have to accept the invite?
Yeah, good question.
Probably not.
Yeah.
The other thing that's really stuck for me is the pyramid. And if you can't draw a direct line between your meeting and the overall goals of the business, then why are you having the meeting anyway?
Yep.
And the final thing is around process and mixing it up, playing around, thinking about if you're co-creating or telling, testing, consulting, think about your process and play a bit of jazz, do different things. Don't just be playing middle C the whole time.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Oh, we did some good stuff, didn't we?
We did.
And just listening to that, what I'm minded about, which I think the Kaleidoscope does really well to highlight, is the interconnected nature of all of these things.
Yeah.
So a meeting is not a list of topics.
No.
A meeting is not a group of people wedged into a calendar invite who haven't eaten. And a meeting should be a meeting of minds, a meeting of possibilities. You know, we often talk about Chinese medicine. If I go to see a Chinese doctor and my big toe on my right foot is hurting, the chances are he'll do something with my left earlobe because that Chinese doctor knows that my whole body is connected. Similarly with the car engine.
Yeah.
If we took a car engine and we had all of the parts laid out in front of us and every single part worked perfectly, unless they are put together in the right way, the engine will not work. And it's the same with meetings. It's the same with the meeting kaleidoscope. If you have everything in balance and recognize the interconnected nature of purpose, content, people and process, and you twist that kaleidoscope to get everything in balance, well, then you really can start to motor. And we have seen people that we've worked with get playful and prep having been a game changer, which is incredible, such a small shift to make. But we really do believe that everything's possible. And the question back to everybody listening to this webinar is, if this has been a meeting of minds and you've recognised anything of what we've said, it's on you to make the changes that you believe that you can make. So right back at the beginning, I asked this question, I'm asking it again, how good could we really make this? So if you've enjoyed or any of this webinar has resonated with you and you want more information, the meeting book covers an awful lot of the kaleidoscope. It's a reasonably fast read with good quality information in there that you might find accessible and easy to implement. We've mentioned a lot of tools, so other people's work like Sam Kana, Peter Senge, Nonaka and Takeuchi. You know, if you want more information about them, we can probably...
We'll share the links to the
share
books.
the link. And we have got this graphic, this visual that Ellie's created. So where can people see that?
So this will be on the website to download very shortly.
So thank you very much for being with us. We've enjoyed the conversation
yes.
and we hope you have too. Thank you.
Thank you.